Everyone, today we discuss about the cranial nerves 7th and 8th. First we discuss about the cranial nerve 7 and in the later part cranial nerve 8. So cranial nerve 7 is called as a facial nerve. It is a mixed nerve containing both motor and sensory root. Now it is motor nerve. It is named facial nerve because it supplies the muscles of facial expression and it is the most frequently paralyzed of all the peripheral nerves of the body. So here in this diagram, facial nerve including the mixed nerve. So out of the 12 pair of cranial nerve first, second and 8 are the sensory, purely sensory. Cranial nerve 3, 4, 6, 11 and 12 are purely motor. While cranial nerve 5, 7, 9 and 10 are mixed, means having a both motor fibers as well as sensory fibers. This diagram showing the cranial nerves. So this diagram showing the origin, course and distribution of the facial nerve. So cranial nerve, as the name suggests, it arises within the cranial cavity. So it come out from the brainstem. So this diagram is the diagram of brainstem. So facial nerve is arises from the pontomedullary junction, lateral part of the pontomedullary junction between olive and inferior cerebellar peduncle through motor and sensory root is come out. But it has deep nuclear origin. So in the lower part of the pons having a deep nuclear origin is there, that is called as a motor nucleus of the facial nerve that we discuss in the later part. Now it has two root, large motor medial root that is called as a facial nerve proper and small sensory root that lies on the lateral aspect, that is also called as a nervus intermedius. Now the two roots arise from the pontomedullary junction lateral to the superior end of the olive of the medulla oblongata. The sensory root lies between motor root of facial medially and vestibulocochlear nerve laterally. So in short, 7th and 8th cranial nerve come out at the pontomedullary junction between olive and inferior cerebellar peduncle. So after emerging from the brainstem, roots of the facial nerve pass laterally and forward in the cerebellopontine angle along with the vestibulocochlear nerve and labyrinthine artery. So all these structure finally enter via internal acoustic meatus. Now within the meatus, motor root lodges in a groove present on the vestibulocochlear nerve, while the sensory root remain separate. Now at the lateral end of the internal acoustic meatus, that is called as the bottom of the internal acoustic meatus, two roots again unite. Two roots again unite and form the trunk of the facial nerve. Now facial nerve enters the facial canal in the petrous part of the temporal bone via opening in the bottom or fundus of the internal acoustic meatus. Then this facial canal is divided into three segments: labyrinthine segment, tympanic segment and mastoid segment. Now first we discuss about the labyrinthine segment of the facial canal that lies above the vestibule of the bony labyrinth and bends to reach the anterosuperior part of the medial wall of the middle ear, or we can say tympanic cavity, near the processus cochleariformis. Here the facial canal bends sharply backward and the facial nerve course through the labyrinthine segment of the facial canal also makes sharp bend called as the external genu of the facial nerve. and this possesses the geniculate ganglion. So location of the geniculate ganglion is here, where there is a presence of external genu of the facial nerve. There is a location of the geniculate ganglion. Next to this, there is a tympanic segment. Tympanic segment of the facial canal runs horizontally backward within the medial wall of the middle ear, and then it reaches the junction of medial and posterior wall of the middle ear. So here there is a bulging of the tympanic segment. Bulging of tympanic segment of the facial canal is seen in the medial wall of the middle ear above the promontory and fenestra vestibuli, and below this bulge is produced by the lateral semicircular canal. Then mastoid segments begins at the junction of medial and posterior wall of the middle ear, and then it passes vertically downward the posterior wall of the middle ear cavity till it reaches the stylomastoid foramen. Here there is a location of stylomastoid foramen at the base of the skull. So this one is the mastoid part, this one is the tympanic part, and this one is the labyrinthine part. These are the three part of the facial canal through which both motor and sensory route are passes. Now branches and distribution of the facial nerve. First branch, that is from the geniculate ganglion, that is the greater petrosal nerve. So greater petrosal nerve arises from the geniculate ganglion. It consists of preganglionic parasympathetic fiber which make a union with the deep petrosal nerve, and from the nerve of pterygoid canal passes through this pterygoid canal and relay into the pterygopalatine ganglion. And from the pterygopalatine ganglion, post-sympathetic post-ganglionic fiber are arise, and through zygomatic nerve, it finally via lacrimal nerve relay into the lacrimal gland. So it carries secretomotor fiber to the lacrimal gland as well as mucous gland of the nasal cavity and palate. Then second branch is the nerve to stapedius. This one. It arises from the vertical part of the facial nerve through a short canal within it to reach the stapedius muscle and supply to this muscle. Then third branch, that is chorda tympani. This one is the chorda tympani. That is also given intracranial within the facial canal, vertical part of the facial nerve, about 6 millimeter above the stylomastoid foramen, and then enter the medial ear cavity via posterior canaliculus. Then it runs across the lateral wall of the middle ear. It runs across the lateral wall of the middle ear by passing between the long process of incus and handle of malleus, and then leaves the middle ear by entering the anterior canaliculus. Anterior canaliculus. Then it traverses through the bony canaliculus and enters the infratemporal fossa through medial end of the petrotympanic fissure. And after emerging from the petrotympanic fissure, it runs medially forward and downward, crossing the medial aspect of the spine of sphenoid bone, and to join the posterior aspect of the lingual nerve. Join the posterior aspect of the lingual nerve. Now, chorda tympani now consists of two types of fiber. One is preganglionic parasympathetic fiber, that is general visceral efferent fibers, which provide secretomotor fiber to the submandibular as well as sublingual gland. So this one is the submandibular and sublingual gland. For this, secretomotor fibers carry via chorda tympani. Another is the spatial visceral afferent fibers. So that carries the spatial sensation, that is the taste sensation, from the anterior two-third of the tongue, that is carried via this chorda tympani. So these are the two component of fiber present inside the chorda tympani nerve. Then fourth branch is, that is posterior auricular nerve. Just after coming out via stylomastoid foramen, it gives posterior auricular nerve supply the occipital belly of the occipitofrontalis muscle. Then it gives nerve to posterior digastric muscle, nerve to stylohyoid muscle. And then by winding around the lateral aspect of the styloid process of temporal bone, it pierces the posteromedial surface of large salivary gland, that is parotid gland. Through posteromedial surface of the parotid gland, it enters the parotid gland. So here inside the parotid gland, it lies most superficially, and it runs about 1 centimeter within the gland, and it lies superficial to the retromandibular vein as well as external carotid artery. Then within the gland, it divides into two main trunk, that is called as a temporophacial and cervicofacial trunk. This temporophacial trunk is divided into temporal and zygomatic branch, and faciocervical trunk is divided into buccal, marginal mandibular, and cervical branch. Finally, these five terminal branches of the facial nerve is coming out via anterior border of the parotid gland. So this temporal, zygomatic, upper and lower buccal, marginal mandibular, and cervical. Cervical branch passes via apex of the parotid gland, supply the platysma muscle. So in short, all the five terminal branches are look like a goose foot pattern. Five terminal branches, like a branching pattern of the goose foot. It is also known as a pes anserinus. So these five terminal branches supply the muscles of the face. So muscles of the facial expression are supplied by the facial nerve. Five terminal branches of the facial nerve. So facial nerve, it is a nerve of the second branchial arch or pharyngeal arch, second pharyngeal arch. And now the second pharyngeal arch is the facial nerve. That's why facial nerve supply the muscles of the facial expression. Apart from these, other muscles are also muscles of the second branchial arch and supply this muscle. So this is the course and distribution of the facial nerve, having intracranial branches as well as extracranial branches. This diagram showing another diagram of this course of the facial nerve. So this one is the larger motor root, smaller sensory root, and at the bottom of the internal acoustic meatus, both the root fuse and form the single trunk, and it form the external genu. Actually, internal genu is present inside the brainstem. This one is the external genu, making a backward turn. And inside this genu, there is a presence of chainicular ganglion. So this chainicular ganglion gives first one, that is greater petrosal. Then this one is the labyrinthine part, tympanic part, and this one is the mastoid part. Then this one is the vertical course of the facial canal through which facial nerve is passes. Then it gives nerve to stapedius, coda tympani nerve, and uh, to the auricular ramus of the vagus nerve. Then after coming out from the stylomastoid form, it gives posterior auricular nerve. So these diagrams A showing the secretomotor parasympathetic fiber as well as sensory fiber of the facial nerve inside the cranial cavity, that is called as the intracranial course. This one is the motor branches of the facial muscle expression as well as scalp muscle, that is the extracranial course of the facial nerve. Five terminal branches of the facial nerve. How it enters the parotid gland and divided into five terminal branches: temporal, zygomatic, upper lower buccal, marginal mandibular, and cervical. So this branching pattern is look like a goose foot, called as a pes anserinus. Supply the muscles of the facial expression. So these are the functional component and nuclei, having four nuclei. One is motor nucleus of the facial nerve. Second is the superior salivatory and lacrimatory nuclei. Third is the nucleus of the tractus solitarius, and final is the spinal nucleus and tract of the trigeminal nerve. So this motor nucleus of the facial nerve is present in the lower part of the pons. This is the diagram section of the pons. Now motor fibers which arise from the motor nucleus of the facial nerve, they wind around the abducens nerve nucleus. So their passes posteromedial to the abducens nerve nucleus, then abruptly wind round and enter the lower part of the pons. So this abruptly turning that from the internal genome of the facial nerve, and that portion can be enlarged within the floor of the fourth ventricle as a facial colliculus. Then motor fibers of the facial nerve passes the caudal portion of the pons and finally come out at the pontomedullary junction from the lateral part of the pontomedullary junction between olive and inferior cerebellar peduncle as a motor fibers. So these fibers arise from the motor nucleus of the facial nerve from the facial visceral efferent fibers, and that lies in the pons and supply the muscles of the facial expression. Then second is the general visceral efferent fiber. So that arise from the dorsolateral to the motor nucleus of the facial nerve. There is presence of superior salivatory nucleus. So these are the preganglionic parasympathetic fibers arise from the lacrimatary as well as superior salivatory nucleus present within the brainstem and supply the secretomotor fibers to the lacrimal gland as well as submandibular and sublingual gland. Third is the spatial visceral afferent fibers. So they carries the spatial sensation of taste from the anterior two-third of the tongue except velvet papilla and also from the soft palate. So that relay within the upper part, there is a presence of gustatory nucleus within the nucleus of rectus solitarius in the within the brainstem. And fourth functional component, that is general somatic afferent fiber, is yellow color one. So general somatic afferent as well as spatial visceral afferent, their central body cell body is present within the chainiculate ganglion. From here fiber finally are relayed within the spinal nucleus and tract of the trigeminal nerve. So this sensation carried from the skin of the concha or auricle, that is communicate via the auricular branch of the vagus nerve, and this sensation finally relay into the spinal nucleus and tract of the trigeminal nerve. Now next portion of the facial nerve we discuss in the later part.